Chapter 29 Scholarship of Integration and the Future of Medical Education and Research. Subtender nas sabadikari, Bajiajuti Pridashani, Elvisimachalam Cuticorat, Shantan Jidabura, Saranya Mukherjee, Vamsi Krishna, Sadness Sharma, Amy Price, and Rakesh Biswas. Abstract: Scholarship of integration is meant to make connections within and between disciplines to result in a new knowledge or practice. Applied to medical education, it aims to distribute the fruits of academic activities to benefit patient care, which in turn facilitates the construction of new knowledge translated into practice. The students are the immediate users whose outcomes are both driven and measured by assessment. Patients are the ultimate beneficiaries whose needs are of foremost consideration. The advent of new digital technologies in e-learning and assessment makes it possible for bridging the gap between the patient care expectations and student learning outcomes. In this chapter, we describe a comprehensive model of integration, which is compatible with the new vision of India to bring synergy between modern Western medicine with traditional systems of medicine practiced in India for optimizing healthcare delivery. We have demonstrated a working prototype for scholarly integration in medical education and research framework showcasing student user-driven, patient-centered assessments of learning outcomes driving healthcare outcomes. It includes predominantly user-driven case-based blended learning ecosystem and patient-centered assessment with other elements, problem mapping, evidence-based audit, peer review, peer assessment with online portfolio system. It highlights a participatory action research framework and learning ecosystem that thrives in transparency, accountability, and real-time evidence-based audit of education and practice. In addition, we have reported a SWOT analysis and offered suggestions for further exploring our prototype model, especially in Indian and other similar settings. Key words: scholarship, integration, patient-centered learning, medical education, medical practice, research, connections. Assess need. This is a postulated effective tool to tackle the problem statement highlighted in the chapter primarily around two broad categories and its subcategories. A current disintegration of medical education and practice medical student and faculty engagement in rote memorization through an arcane curriculum that promotes plagiarism and diminishes scholarship, which is disconnected from patients who continue to suffer due to lack of student and faculty engagement with them in a broader, empathic, meaningful manner. The long overdue national medical integration of healthcare delivery through methodologically diverse streams of interventions. India's traditional and tribal systems of medicine have been historically neglected due to undue hype created by an ancient but dominant Western mode of medical education that does not allow for critical thinking and current evidence, but instead embroils our students and teachers in inflexible and systems-dependent thinking. The current West has moved on globally, and we aim to move beyond the colonial past that hinders students and teachers from learning and developing clinical practice that meets the needs of India. Who are the intended audience for this chapter? All beneficiaries of medical education, including the primary beneficiary, also known as patients, or care seekers, as well as caregivers ranging from medical students, their teachers and practicing physicians, as well as medical education and practice researchers and administrators. What issues does this chapter address? Medical education research is a tool to eventually improve patient outcomes, as patients are the ultimate beneficiaries of medical education. For most medical students and teachers, medical education begins with their entry to medical school and begins with an introduction to the dead body. And this cadaveric teacher bears its innards for all budding health professionals to learn various components of the individual human system even while they attend parallel classes on physiology, and biochemistry to further learn how this anatomic structure functions in a living human in all its fascinating internal molecular and cellular complexity. Again, in the next year, they learned pathology, which describes how a body is structurally ravaged by illness at a cellular and molecular level, often historically unraveled after death. Finally, they are introduced to the whole alive human being in their later clinical years, where they learn to apply the knowledge of yesteryears to a living complex human being with his or her complex network of problems rooted either in his or her environment or genes. However, this was not always how medicine was historically learned, and this current curricular methodology of putting dry factual content before the student gets to experience learning in the context of the entire human undermines the very ethos of medical education, which is essentially to help health professionals improve patient care outcomes. Consequently, one main problem statement theme for this chapter is the current disintegration of medical education with practice and the tool that it aims to resolve the problem with the scholarly integration of medical education and research. The other problem that this chapter addresses with the same tool is the current issue of national medical integration, which has reached a tipping point due to a reigning COVID chaos that has fast-tracked all diverse interventions with varying methodological backgrounds into battling one single disease. Essentially, we need to move past pandemic crisis to meet other medical needs even within a pandemic or endemic crisis. Scholarship of integration in medical education and research. What it is and what it isn't. Scholarship of integration in medical education and research makes connections within and between disciplines, locating knowledge in a broader context, giving meaning to specific discoveries. It aims to distribute the fruits of academic discovery to benefit specific individual members of society, also known as patients, who in turn help academics to multiply the construction of new knowledge translated into practice. It is vital that academic institutions and medical schools remain relevant in an era when the production of knowledge is increasingly recognized as a social collaborative activity. A current disintegration of medical education and practice. Medical student and faculty engagement in rote memorization through an arcane curriculum. Found rote learning tends to promote plagiarism and diminish scholarship, which is disconnected from patients who continue to suffer due to lack of student and faculty engagement with them in a broader, empathic, meaningful manner. The long overdue national medical integration of healthcare delivery through methodologically diverse streams of interventions. India's traditional and tribal system of medicine have been historically neglected due to undue hype created by an outdated but dominant Western mode of medical education that is inconsistent with Indian culture, patient needs and preference, and which will prepare our future physicians to engage with empathy, critical thinking, and collaboration, as this model leans heavily on hierarchical structures that do not allow for the development of flexible minds and resilient hearts needed for the practice of medicine in this century. Quoting Shankar, long-term strategy involving radical changes in medical education, research, clinical practice, public health, and the legal and regulatory framework is needed to innovate India's public health system and make it both integrative and participatory. India can be a world leader in the new emerging field of integrative healthcare because we have over the last century or so assimilated and achieved a reasonable degree of competence in biomedical and life sciences, and we possess an incredibly rich and varied medical heritage of our own. Although current West has moved on globally, it is time now for Indian medicine to rise to meet the challenges of today's world and put aside the dogmas and the colonial subservience that continues to haunt our education and practice. Our proposed tool of scholarly integration enables shared knowledge through a participatory framework and includes practical methods to guide institutional change along with reporting and evaluating them. At the outset, one must clarify that scholarship of integration is not the same as scholarship of teaching and learning, also known as SOTL, and borrowing from an excellent recent editorial. SOTL, as identified by Filton, thrives on 5 principles. 1. Inquiry focused on student learning. 2. Grounded in context. 3. Methodologically sound. 4. Conducted in partnership with students. And 5. Appropriately public. Singh and Gupta's editorial contributes very interesting questions. How such a scholarship can be evaluated? Should it focus on output or outcome? The answer to the first would be open access self-publication in one's own online learning portfolio, such as even an online question paper design can be shared for evaluation among peers as here. http divided by medicine department.blogspot.com divided by 2021 divided by 5 divided by online blended monthly assignment.html. The above link to our online test for the month of May 2021 is essentially a student user-driven, real patient-centered, experiential sharing of individual patient data in the form of patient-centered questions for solving and helping those individuals. The competencies tested are the questions below cover the entire spectrum from anatomy, physiology to diagnostic, therapeutic uncertainty to resolve one disease theme and predictably move from symptoms to diagnosis and treatment challenges. For traditional classification purposes, we have classified the questions into anatomical areas. Most questions test the reading comprehension skills of the examinee and some prior familiarity with medical terms and strategies, and also more importantly assesses their ability to use online search tools for better expression of their learning. Points in the form of answers that are again made available open access for post-publication peer review. In summary, the answers to the following questions in this online question paper will assess the examinee's competencies in empathically dealing with clinical problem solving, medical terminologies familiarity including areas of anatomy, physiology, pathology, current EBM strategies for managing diagnostic and therapeutic uncertainty. Although unlike last month, it doesn't test the competencies for familiarity with empathy, humanities, and MLAI. Q10 looks at another topical area, and that is medical education itself, where students are also encouraged to think about their learning process. The answer to the second would surely be outcomes, but not just on student learning, but also in the context of medical education directed toward its ultimate beneficiaries, that is, the patients themselves, through a framework that enables driving of patient outcomes through student learning outcomes and a real-time clinical audit trail that allows us to join the dots between the two. The above would bring us closer to scholarship of integration in medical education and research, which is not just about integrating scholarship of teaching learning with the scholarship of discovery, but is all about integration of patient-centered societal goals with teaching and learning. Brief scholarship of integration in medical education and research, what it is and what it isn't. Scholarship of integration in medical education and research makes connections within and between disciplines, locating knowledge in a broader context, giving meaning to specific discoveries. It aims to benefit individual patients, who in turn help academics to facilitate the construction of new knowledge translated into practice. Working prototype for scholarly integration includes student user-driven, patient-centered assessments of learning outcomes driving healthcare outcomes. Other elements are case-based blended learning ecosystem and patient-centered assessment with other elements, problem mapping, evidence-based audit, peer review, peer assessment with online portfolio system. Scholarship of integration enables shared knowledge through a participatory framework and includes practical methods to guide institutional change along with reporting and evaluating them. Scholarship of integration focuses on outcomes not just on student learning but also in the context of medical education directed toward its ultimate beneficiaries, that is, the patients themselves, through a framework that enables driving of patient outcomes through student learning outcomes and a real-time critical audit trail that allows us to join the dots between the two. Contextualize. The corresponding author of this chapter began with a few ideas in 2002 at Manipal College of Medical Sciences, Pokhara, Nepal. There he encouraged his medical students to record their individual patients' narratives. In 2008, the first conceptual model for CBBLE was developed, called as UDHC. This reaffirms the fact that CBBLE had a strong component of offline connection and locality that was blended to requirements of the online users. The motto behind developing CBBLE as a subset of UDHC was to build a case-based reasoning database that would serve as a platform for healthcare providers as well as patients to make best decisions for individual cases by comparing and learning from the cases with the database of other individual patients with similar trajectories. The concept of CBBLE was presented by one of our elective students at Medical Education Conference at IIMS, Bhubaneswar in January 2020 and by another student at a medical college in California in early 2021. The pandemic, seemingly a big loss for education, proved to be a blessing in disguise to strengthen our system, as it drove newer opportunities to explore online learning with non-BMJ elective students, who added a considerable amount of data to our work around scholarship of integration. The pandemic was well utilized by taking classes globally, where we regularly connect with our students live during morning rounds and also encourage them to make individual case presentations and also record it in their portfolios. Many of these case reports from the student electives are available in BMJ Case Reports archives at PubMed Central. So it can be said that the snowball effect was achieved in a steady, dedicated manner. The destination looks unpredictable, especially due to the pandemic and all the visible and non-visible constraints. Yet it is being traversed with proper planning and a zeal to bring about a positive change. The mushrooming of problem statements and solutions at different places at different times is being tackled with both a vertical and horizontal approach. All these efforts have made it possible for our proposed model of scholarship of integration to stand where it is today. In this chapter, some snippets from this evolving and ongoing real story are presented. Individual integration of different roads to healing. One of our expert patients has published another paper with our team members where she elaborated on her cure and the integration of multidisciplinary interventions that was brought about to effect it. She subsequently utilized the power of online integration to provide a voice to similar stories from many patients around the world. Quoting her version from the paper, the large doses of prednisone I took to try to resolve my ITP plus the usual factors of age, hormones, and genetics resulted in a diagnosis of osteoporosis. For both of these conditions, I am sorting through the medical hype, trying to determine the validity and meaning of the sometimes conflicting diagnostic tests, and weighing the different approaches for improving my health. What I'm finding is no different from what I found 20 years ago. The treatments suggested by the endocrinologists and alternative doctors are often very different. The patient experiences do not match the published literature. There are significant pharmaceutical profit motives that may skew the diagnosis, research, and treatment suggestions. Once again, I'm balanced in the middle with one foot in the conventional world and one in the alternative world, trying to find a secure and reliable place to heal. And there are millions of us who feel this way. Pandemic-driven acceleration of scholarship of integration between different ways of knowing and doing in healthcare. The current chaos in modern medical healthcare reflects a failure of evidence-based medical education and research directed at the end beneficiary of medical education. That is the patient, and the time is ripe for scholarship of integration to develop the optimal adaptive systems framework for it. Quoting verbatim from a recent essay in Lancet Global Health, particularly focused in India, although very relevant globally. Academic institutions and professional medical societies should reflect on their roles. A range of recommendations and treatment algorithms from non-defining medical institutions and societies are circulating on social media. These institutions are notable by their failure to share the evidence that informs these recommendations, discuss nuances of implementation, or present conflicts of interests of those involved in developing these recommendations. National medical integration and the role of scholarship of integration in medical education and research 100 years ago. Independent research in Ayurveda on scientific lines was planned with the establishment of the Jatiya Ayurvedic Vidyalaya in 1921, also known as Calcutta National Medical College, founded as a product of the non-cooperation movement, and was inaugurated by Subhas Chandra Bose. Calcutta National Medical College was nationalized in 1967 and was perhaps the first private medical college in India to be nationalized. More here, https://medicinedepartment.blogspot.com/2021/06 national medical integration enroll.html. More about it in the description. But before that, a quick look at the history of integration of medical education and research from 200 years in India, with the British integrating their system of Western medicine with that of the pre-existing Indian system, with near total demise of the Indian system. 100 years later, there is a pandemic-driven resurgence toward another attempt at integration, and scholarship of integration in medical education and research can go a long way to connect these different ways of knowing and doing healthcare through a patient-centered framework that is described below. Describe why, to put the current disintegration of medical education and practice into context. We need to first understand individual patient requirements and societal requirements to gain further insights into medical practice and how it can be integrated with medical education. We share below an illustrative example from one of our online expert patients that we have published before. The details are available here, https://medicinedepartment.blogspot.com divided by 2021 divided by 6 divided by part 1 contextualizing need for .html. How the problem statement for this chapter, as also mentioned above in the introduction, is the current disintegration of medical education with practice. And the tool that it aims to resolve this problem is the scholarship of integration in medical education and research. The chapter will now proceed to describe how this can be done through a current working prototype of student user-driven, patient-centered assessments of learning outcomes driving healthcare outcomes, and also provide a historical overview of how this developed in different Indian medical colleges through a faculty coordinator and his students and patients. Evolution of a model for patient-centered scholarship of integration in medical education and research. The participatory case-based blended learning ecosystem CBBLE framework, that is a model for a patient-centered scholarship of integration in medical education, has been actively evolving since a few decades in different medical colleges in India and has been described in detailed timeline in the link below, http://medicinedepartment.blogspot.com divided by 2021 divided by 6 divided by evolution of model for patient-centered.html. Working prototype of a scholarly integration of medical education and research framework. The working prototype shared here is a minimalistic user-driven learning framework that enriches pre-existing curricular and assessment infrastructures instead of dramatically attempting to change it but aims at effecting a slow transformation. More here, https://medicinedepartment.blogspot.com divided by 2021 divided by 6 divided by working prototype of scholarly.html. Student user driven patient centered assessment prototype. In this module, our readers can see how the patient data captured in the previous module was utilized in a monthly summative assessment test for the same batch of students to test their competencies in patient care related to clinical problem solving through empathic patient data capture and continuity of communication. More here, https://medicinedepartment.blogspot.com divided by 2021 divided by 6 divided by student user driven patient centered.html. Gradual integration of traditional with competency driven curricula in a patient centered learning framework. The definition of competency for a medical student health professional is habitual, consistent, and judicious use of communication, knowledge, technical skills, clinical reasoning, emotions, values, and reflections in daily practice for the benefit of the individual being served. Scholarship of integration driven by shared online learning portfolios promoting formative, reading comprehension, and creative writing scholastic competencies in peer review assessment. This form of online portfolio-based formative assessment of competency can be improved upon and rapidly scaled to all medical colleges in India. This is an evidence-based formative and summative assessment of the learning competencies of 2016 MBBS batch posted in the Department of Medicine online from May 2020 to March 2021 and ward postings from Feb 21 to first week of March 2021. The formative assessment is from each of students' logged competency around patients evaluated regularly from date of joining. The formative assessment has been divided into non-verbal, which assesses their competency in procedure domains, including empathic communication and body language, and verbal, which assesses their ability to communicate their patient-centered work, evidenced in their day-to-day e-logs. More here, https://medicinedepartment.blogspot.com divided by 2021 divided by 6 divided by scholarship of integration driven by .html. Peer-to-peer review, assessment of online assignments in e-logged learning portfolios. Unfortunately, in our soon-to-be-passed offline system of medical education, we inadvertently reward students for stealing by giving the best marks in theory answer papers to the best copy-pasted answers from memorized textbooks, thus encouraging a hitherto unrecognized form of plagiarism. But the real world of virtual learning cannot tolerate sharing of unoriginal work. More here, https://medicinedepartment.blogspot.com divided by 2021 divided by 6 divided by peer-to-peer review assessment of online.html. Evidence-based medical assessments drive student learning outcomes. This is not just evidence-based medical education with evidence of correlation between awarded marks versus process of assessment, but also an attempt to integrate medical education with practice by putting the patient at the center of medical education. Here is a description of an Indian patient's quest for cure, taking him away from mainstream medicine and making him embrace other streams, including Ayurveda. The patient finds a respite, although short-lived, as it worsens again and makes him again having to approach mainstream medical practitioners. In this narrative, an endoscope is put inside the patient's colon, followed by medicines that are manufactured by the big pharmaceutical industry, making connections between different ways of knowing and doing. In the above framework of what is just one stream of healthcare delivery among other delivery frameworks, we cite below a patient-centered example of another closely related healthcare delivery framework that the British subjugated 200 years back. More here, medicinedepartment.blogspot.com/2021/06/ making connections between different .html. The bot sums this up. Empathic narrative of a 35-year-old UC patient. April 15, 2021. This current case report shows the empathic narrative of a 40-year-old male in his own words on his 15 years journey with ulcerative colitis. What can be more painful than having a disease well diagnosed but not responding to any treatment? And when it combines with having to consume endless medicines and spending hours together in the toilet with no improvement, it's worse than a nightmare. My journey with ulcerative colitis was the same past 15 years. It all started in the year 2004 when I had regular episodes of abdominal pain followed by bowel evacuation with blood and mucus. When I consulted a local hospital, I was put on a bunch of medicines without any proper diagnosis. Symptoms went on increasing day by day. I then consulted a gastroenterologist who performed colonoscopy and gave the diagnosis of ulcerative colitis. Chills went down my spine when I have read about the disease over internet. I was already suffering with neck pain, lower back pain and headaches for years, and this added up now. I was started on steroids and few other medications. The doctors believed that the painkillers which I used continuously for my pains could have possibly triggered this. No dose of steroids gave me any relief, so were other drugs. I went on changing doctors for opinions to check whether the diagnosis or the treatment was going well or not. It only made things more complicated as every doctor asked for a series of fresh investigations before commenting anything. Any little variation in food used to trigger severe episodes of mucoid stools and abdominal pain. Headaches were a regular menace. Any oral medication for one issue used to trigger another problem. My family life and social life got badly affected. The need to rush to toilet frequently made me stick to home unemployed. I tried working from home for a while, but I was in a state of mental depression thinking round the clock about the disease and reading about it. I was in a feeling of becoming a financial burden for my family, after which I silently went on consuming steroids and other medicines, probiotics and immunosuppressants from 2004 to 2016. 10 years have passed away with endless endoscopies, colonoscopies, biopsies and blood tests. Everything was pointing towards the same diagnosis. I had to undergo blood transfusion too in the middle as my hemoglobin levels have fallen low. It alters between 6 minus 8 gm. Moving out of home was a Herculean task. On advice of a friend and in search of cure with a hope, I retorted to Ayurveda treatment in the year 2016. I was evaluated and advised a few medications and therapies, treatments to be undergone. As I was skeptic towards a YUSH systems, I was given contacts of other patients of UC at the hospital. It's only after speaking to them I could get courage to proceed further. Things went well for 2-3 years, and as my abdominal pain and episodes of stool evacuation reduced greatly, I was optimistic. It's then that things started to go out of the track again. Slowly my symptoms went on increasing day by day, and accordingly necessary changes were made in my treatment schedule, but in vain. I was back to the state of mental depression when one day the treating doctor said I may have to restart modern drugs for a while to control acute episodes. I was greatly depressed, not only because of this, but on seeing other patients getting cured. I didn't know what was going wrong in my case. There were many sleepless nights thinking and reading a lot about this disease and searching for a possible cure, but in vain. The worst phase of my life started in the year 2020 when I started to spend 4-6 hours in the toilet. I never expected that my health condition could deteriorate to such extent. No medicine was working and slowly suicidal thoughts took over my mental status. At this moment again, I have approached another hospital on the advice of the doctor treating me, and they plan to start a drug called azathioprine only after using steroid for a week. Cursing my fate, I have started it again by the patient's Ayurveda physician. On the evening of fifth day after starting steroid, the patient fell down unconscious while walking around casually. He was immediately rushed to a hospital and on the way had a seizure activity. CT brain revealed bifrontal hemorrhagic infarction. Necessary management was initiated. He continued to be in vegetative state with no significant response. Re-evaluation with MRI brain revealed extensive cerebral edema and he was planned for craniotomy. As the financial burden went on increasing, he was shifted to a government hospital and there the patient finally lost his fight. Above was a description of how scholarship of integration in medical education and research practice has been operational in some medical colleges in India through patient and student-centered connections between their individual learning requirements toward better health care outcomes. Figure 1 Scholarship Integration and the Future of Medical Education and Research. Scholarship of Integration in Medical Education and Practice. Knowledge Dissemination. Supervised Student. Patient. Knowledge Dissemination. Doctor Teacher. Knowledge Dissemination. Now we shall proceed to engage our readers to evaluate the above described process, again through a patient-centered medical education lens and describe the road ahead. Summarize. This chapter has contextualized and described a working prototype for scholarly integration in medical education and research framework showcasing student user-driven patient-centered assessments of learning outcomes driving healthcare outcomes. Summary statement from the brief section. The working prototype described in this chapter tackles the above problem statements head-on and describes a participatory action research framework and learning ecosystem that thrives in transparency, accountability, and real-time evidence-based audit of education and practice. So what? Strengths. Promising solution to current field need that can bridge gaps in healthcare learning competencies as well as address patient outcome complexities. Weaknesses, quasi-experimental and complex study design and consequent potential of study sample selection bias. Opportunities, potential to scale into a sustainable model of practice-based learning toward improving patient outcomes. Reads, participant motivation leading to study attrition. Patient privacy and confidentiality. To appreciate the experiment fully, the comfort zone of printed books has to be forsaken and the hyperlinks mentioned in the chapter have to be visited repeatedly. Figure 2 Working Model of Scholarship of Integration with its major pillars and outcomes. Evaluate. The essential premise behind scholarship of integration in medical education and research as portrayed in this chapter has been around making connections between patients. Medical students more here, http://consciousnotebookcircle.blogspot.com/2014/. What is the first step toward developing competency in making connections? In the medical student-driven real example of connecting to patients, what were the necessary competencies that came from medical training and from pre-medical upbringing? The next driver toward making connections in scaling scholarship of integration is an often neglected tool also known as peer review assessment. Traditionally, assessments have always been between higher authorities, also known as teachers assessing a lower-powered student, while in the real world, humans assess each other all the time, and all humans thrive on feedback. Here, https://medicinedepartment.blogspot.com/2021/06/medicine department paper for June 2021. HTML M equals 1 is the medicine assessment online assignment for June 2021 that aims to evaluate the examinee's aptitude for a scholarship which is reflected in their ability to read, comprehend, analyze, reflect upon, and discuss captured patient-centered data as in their original answers to the assignment for May 2021. The scholarship of integration, which is reflected in 1. Their ability to connect with and capture patient-centered data. 2. Their ability to connect with and engage in shared learning with their peers through peer review feedback. Here is a link to an answer by one of the 2019 batch students, where she provides peer review feedback to 10 students answering the May 2021 question as a part of her answer to the June 2021 question 1. http /5.blogspot.com divided by 2021 divided by 6 divided by General Medicine Monthly Assignment June.html. Can regular student-driven peer review assessment of patient-centered learning in medical students create the much-needed change in not just improving scholarship in individual students and faculty, but improve overall collective learning outcomes as well as healthcare outcomes. Road ahead. Scholarship of integration is a movement that will grow organically and is also as old as civilization, only it has been currently augmented by technology that facilitates human connections and scholarship through improved asynchronous communication. More here, https://medicinedepartment.blogspot.com/2021/06/ introduction to evolution of human.html. One of the amazing transformations that we can look forward to in the near future is tremendous improvement in individual patient data-based reasoning systems that will give new meaning to precision medicine, which shall make the process of healthcare cognition accessible, transparent, and accountable to larger populations. Considerable headway is happening in this direction detailed in this paper, where in addition to the traditional differentiation between implicit and explicit knowledge, it outlines the concepts of general and individual knowledge and connects general knowledge with the frame problem, a fundamental issue of artificial intelligence, as well as individual knowledge with another important paradigm of artificial intelligence, case-based reasoning, a method of individual knowledge processing that aims at solving new problems based on the solutions to similar cost problems. More has been described by Cantozzi et al. This will all begin with this simple step as described in the chapter of making the first connection between a lifelong medical student and patient toward empathic data capture and representation in a shared database. And as soon as an individual patient data is shared, the data is matched with similar cost patients' illness trajectories and triangulated toward an optimal diagnostic and therapeutic plan for the current patient data shared. This plan for every individual patient may not remain restricted to a single stream of medicine, but will be able to effortlessly integrate different ways of knowing and doing medicine. Current medical education is rather narrow and restricted mostly to clinical rounds and textbook gospels, whereas the rate of doubling of medical knowledge is currently around 72 days. The real-world scenario is changing from research to innovation and telemedicine to informatics, for which the students are not prepared at all. Recent examples include official government notifications for the practice of telemedicine in India for modern medicine and AYUSH disciplines. The Ministry of Health and Family Welfare has been recommending standards for EHR since 2013, but adoption is yet inadequate. Therefore, integration can be started early, even in pre-med schools where integration becomes part of learning and assessment. Gove and Sandars have noted that currently there is a focus on rapid cycles of research to inform teaching, with local and wider dissemination using newer rapid approaches to publication and social media and acceptability of these changes by institutions. Sabadikari has envisaged the renewed role of communication in this digital age, which has been suddenly hastened by the COVID-19 pandemic. Park and Ali believe that there is a lot of work to be done for supporting the balancing of multiple hierarchies across clinical education. However, it can and should be a worthwhile field to explore if and when both individual and organization find a mutually productive space to thrive. The COVID-19 pandemic has shown that the public health concern is a medical as well as a social problem. There lies the importance of bringing the world's scientists together to find effective solutions for controlling the pandemic. By applying novel research frameworks, interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary collaboration are most likely to manage a pandemic's consequences and recurrences. Monash University and the Teaching Academy of Vermont University both are offering excellent online resources for integration of medical education and scholarship. There is one long-standing lacuna in current medical education. An average student scholar of mainstream Western medicine doesn't even know ABCs of a YUSH systems, whereas a YUSH scholars have a better idea on available contemporary modern practices. Isn't it a core need that scholars of modern medicine too need to know the basics of a YUSH systems for the betterment of patients? Some of these diversities may be well addressed by a clinical terminology system like SNOMEDCT. India has already developed a YUSH extensions for SNOMEDCT, and the Ministry of YUSH is also hosting online electronic health records. Our electronic health records and clinical terminology systems such as SNOMEDCT are being welcomed by a YUSH ministry. Example of assessing need, SNOMED International has released the YUSH extension https divided by MLDS. iinstitutes.org/ contextualizing a YUSH ministry has an EHR http://air.is.gov.in/YUSH/. Although there have been publications for such plans, https://www.ncbi.nlm.me.gov/pmc/. Articles divided by PMC 5607391 divided by. Does any health professional educator in India know about these? Acknowledgements to all our patients and students. Specifically, we would like to dedicate it to our current UDHC course students who have performed scholarship of integration with near perfection and would be a shining example of it in the near future. Also, specifically our patients in the UDHC CBBLE group from rural, remote, and even urban locales of India and elsewhere globally, without whom there wouldn't have been any scholarship of integration in healthcare.